Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Plate Waste, Protecting Profit and Planet. My name is Richard Swannell. I'm the International Director at WRAP, and I'm delighted to be hosting the session today. And thank you all for taking the time to come and join us. This webinar is brought to you by WRAP, by Winnow Food Solutions, by the Sustainable Restaurants Association, and by Zero Waste Scotland. And just to set the scene a little bit for today's webinar, you may remember back in the heady days of November, COP26 really raised the challenge of climate change as an urgent global issue that we really have to tackle. And one of the things that came out of COP26 was that food and food system change is one of the key things that's going to help us deliver our objectives under climate change and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So, for example, food waste is a third of all the food produced on the planet, an astonishing figure. But it's also 8% of the greenhouse gas emissions that are produced on the planet. And just to give you an idea what that means if food waste was a country, it would be the third biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions on the planet, behind China and the USA. And you need an area the size of China to actually produce the food that is wasted globally every single year. So tackling food waste is not only does it save money for businesses, and not only does it actually reduce the environmental impact, it's a critical way of actually tackling climate change. And just to bring this alive a little bit more, UNEP, supported by WRAP, produced the Global Food Waste Index report, which is the most up-to-date report on total food waste around the world, which is food waste in homes, in retail, and in hospitality and food service. And that found that there was nearly 1 billion tons from those three sources alone, 61% of which came from households, 26% came from food service, and this includes plate waste, and 13% came from retail. So therefore, tackling food waste is a key issue, and this session is to highlight how plate waste within hospitality and food service setting can be an area where we can collectively tackle and help reduce food waste, both in the UK and around the world. And we've got an excellent panel coming together to help you see the case for this change and how this might be done. And WRAP is here to help you through fostering collective action across the supply chain through our Quartile Commitment 2030, the Food Waste Reduction Roadmap, and of course, Guardians of Grub. So just before I introduce the session for today, I just wanted to, there's a little bit of housekeeping just for everybody to know. This webinar is being recorded as is traditional. We've shared on the Guardians of Grub website, so you can catch up on it at a later date. Please put your comments and questions into the Q&A function, as that will help in the Q&A sessions later on in the webinar. And we'll respond to as many questions as possible during the live Q&A. And if we don't get around to all of them, we will definitely reply by email going forward. Just let's talk about the agenda for today. It's a fantastic agenda. And what it shows is that collaboration is key to driving and making sure change happens. And so just to sort of bring that alive, we have a keynote speech from Rory Sutherland, who's the Vice Chair of Ogilvy UK, describing his thoughts on how to reduce customer wastage and how that can work to a company's advantage. Then we have our insight speakers, Winnow and LSE, who are talking about food waste reduction on plates, and also how you can help customers actually engage in this process and it be a positive message for business. Then my colleague Eleanor Morris will share all the free support that's available and how to tackle this through the Guardians of Grub campaign. And then we have an industry panel chaired by the Sustainable Restaurants Association with Julianne Caillouette-Noble, who's leading that, and then representatives from ISS, the restaurant groups, and Unilever Food Solutions, followed by a Q&A session, and then I'll bring it all together at the end. So a really exciting session today on this webinar. Really looking forward to hearing what the speakers have to say. Just before we go into our first, and I'd introduce our first speaker, we have a poll we'd like you to have a look at. And so we'll just launch the poll. And what we'd like you to do, please, is to tick all the things that apply to your business. You have a couple of minutes to speak. So if you could launch the poll, please, now, that would be fantastic. Tick all that applies to you. I see reducing consumer plate waste as a key priority for my business. I know my organization's plate waste. I know how much, therefore, plate waste is produced. I communicate our sustainability credentials to customers and clients, and I have concerns that reducing plate waste will be detrimental to my business in terms of customer expectations. So please, can I just ask you just to fill in tick all the ones that apply, and that'll be great. And then we'll see what your thoughts are at this particular part of the webinar. Just give you another couple of minutes to fill that questionnaire in. Just 4 questions to respond to. Okay, and I wonder if we can now bring up the results of that, please. So excellent. So 93% of you think that reducing customer plate waste is a key priority, which is fantastic, which means this webinar is all about actually helping you implement that. I know my organization's plate waste, that's interesting, only 20% of you are clear on that. And in the webinar, there'll definitely be guidance on how you can measure your organization's plate waste. I communicate our sustainability credentials to our customers. Great to see that over half of you already do that. That's great. And hopefully this webinar will equip you with more ways of communicating with your customers. And have concerns that reducing plate waste will be detrimental to business. It's only a quarter of you. So really good start. So thank you very much indeed for that. And that's a great scene setting for the webinar and for our speakers for the rest of the day. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Rory Sutherland, who's the Vice Chair of Ogilvy UK, original thinker and co-founder of Ogilvy's Behaviour Science Unit. He has variously been president of the Institute of Practitioners and Advertising, chair of the judges for the direct jury at Cannes, and has spoken at TED Global. He writes regular columns for The Spectator, Market Leader and Impact, and also occasional pieces for Wired. He's the author of 2 books, The Wiki Man and Alchemy, The Surprising Power of Ideas Which Don't Make Sense, and which seems like a perfect segue into his presentation. He's provided us with a video because he was unable to attend today, so that you'll see this as a video. But now I'm going to pass over to Rory. Over to you, Rory.
I think in many ways, the question of food waste in restaurants is very interesting, partly because it kind of resists generalisation. To their great credit, I think the level of waste in restaurants is considerably less than it is in domestic homes. But several experiments which have been uncovered show that there's still potential to do better. And I think there are economic reasons why it's worth doing better. Not least, in fact, I suspect, although it would be incredibly difficult to prove, that there are sectors of society whose level of restaurant visiting may be significantly reduced by the size of the portions. And I've noticed that quite often I'm at cross purposes with a restaurant. The restaurant, particularly true of fast food, assumes I want the best value deal. I'm trying to eat less or reduce the quantity I eat. And this misunderstanding between the restaurant and the customer, I think, lies behind a certain proportion of food waste. So I noticed that when I went on a low-carb diet, I'd quite often go to KFC or McDonald's, and the people behind the counter felt a sense of pain in not giving me the meal option because they thought I was being shortchanged by buying a burger or some chicken wings on their own, whereas by contrast, what I was trying to do was not have the chips because I knew that if they did give me chips, I'd bloody well eat them. And so what I think is a large part of the solution here is simply to give British people permission to ask for things or to normalise things which nobody will ask for left to their own devices. One thing is to say, if you would prefer a smaller portion, please ask. There may be a choice architecture question where you can actually offer smaller portions at a slightly lower cost. Now, I get the fact that the economics of that don't always make sense. It depends entirely on what kind of food you're serving, whether the labour element is actually reduced for a smaller portion, but there must be types of food where that would make sense. And then another thing, which happened to me only yesterday evening, is actually asking people whether they'd like to take leftover food home. Now, in the US, it's fairly normalised. Asking for a box or a container to take things home is fairly standard. You don't feel weird, stingy, or as if you're breaking some sort of social norm. In the UK, only last night, I went to a pizza restaurant. The garlic bread was the size of a pizza, which I wasn't expecting. And sure enough, my wife and I didn't want to eat the whole damn thing, and so they kindly offered us a box in which to take it home. Once the offer is made, you feel completely normal and happy and accepting, but the level of social awkwardness that comes from making that request without prompting is inordinately greater. I also have a hunch, by the way, that restaurants do gain customer loyalty and preference by allowing people to take food home, in the sense that if you have leftover food, and some food, weirdly pizza, keeps its moisture strangely well in a fridge overnight, you do feel that when you eat there, you get 2 meals for the price of one. It's a free breakfast with every dinner, because if you take the leftovers home, that's enough to keep you going for the following day, which, when you think about it, makes restaurant dining considerably better value. So I think a very large part of this is not necessarily imposing smaller quantities on people, it's simply giving them the option of asking. Yes, I think offering people the option for what can be a fairly tokenistic discount, by the way, of a smaller portion at the one extreme, but simply offering the option on a menu is probably a good thing. I think it makes economic sense for you, and I genuinely believe, although as I said it's very difficult to prove because it's very difficult to prove the effect of something on repeat visits. It's a very time-consuming thing to establish. I nevertheless believe that there are cases where people would be more eager, certainly in the case of my 92-year-old father. I think my father would be more eager to go to restaurants if he could request smaller portions. You simply eat less as you get older. Women generally eat slightly less calorifically than men. And what I do notice about my father, who's 92, is he's very happy going to tea shops where you can have one modest thing, but he's slightly discomforted by the idea of restaurants for fear of leaving food wasted or else overeating. And I think one of these things we just have to understand is choice architecture. If you prompt a choice, still or sparkling, most people will tend to order water, much more likely than if you leave that question unasked. Restaurants have been using that to their profit for maybe 10, 15, 20 years now. I think the same thing can apply to smaller portions. I think there's also an issue around menu design where you may allow people the choice to order 2 starters or 3 small things, or again the chance to upgrade starters to main courses, which means that gut buckets like me will pay an extra £7 for a larger Caesar salad, whereas a large number of people will actually say, I'd just like that as a main course at the starter size. Now, okay, there's lost revenue from that. I would also argue that along with the reduction in waste, there's probably repeat business, but I'm not confident enough to claim that except as a kind of assertion. But it is worth noting, as I said, that we have successful experiments which RAP will share with you, which show how simply changing the way in which choices are presented can significantly reduce the amount of food that's wasted. Not defaulting to sachets of sugar would be a small thing. Either have them in a bowl on the table where they can be used as required, or simply allowing people to request them. That may be a bit awkward. That may annoy customers if you have to ask for sugar. But asking at the time, would you like sugar, rather than defaulting to providing 2 soggy-looking sachets, can't hurt. It's not a bad thing to do. And the same goes for condiments. The same goes, by the way, the number of people who are either gluten intolerant or lactose intolerant, offering bread-free versions of things. Quite a few of the restaurants involved in the study showed that bread, particularly the tops of burgers, are very, very likely to remain uneaten, and therefore offering people the option of a naked version of something seems a pretty good idea. One other restaurant, I think it was the Oxo Tower restaurant, found that actually by making bread a request item but putting it on the menu allowed you to premiumise by offering much better bread but charged for. So I think the vital question, I think, is just designing choice and prompting behaviour in a way that makes that behaviour normalised and socially comfortable, rather than effectively imposing something on the customer. What you're doing thereby is simply increasing the scope of their options. It reduces waste, it'll probably help your profits, they prefer it. In one sense, I think this is a case where we can reduce food waste with nothing to lose.
I'm now going to move on to the plate waste prevention highlights, and it is my pleasure to introduce the 2 speakers who are going to speak initially on this topic, which is Marc Zornes, who's the former manager at McKinsey's, where he was a leader in sustainability and consumer practices. While at McKinsey's, Marc co-authored the McKinsey Global Institute report Resource Revolution, Meeting the World's Energy, Material, and Food and Water Needs. And Marc is best known for his founding of Winnow Solutions, which aims to help businesses like hotels, restaurants, and cruise liners reduce their food waste by integrating technology and data collection into their points of disposal. And he is joined by Ganga Shreedhar, who is an assistant professor in behavioural science at LSE and co-director of the MSc in Behavioural Science program. Ganga is an applied behavioural and experimental economist, studying how to change human behaviour in ways that simultaneously benefit people and the planet. Her research examines how individual and contextual factors motivate environmental and ecological choices across different consumer and citizen lifestyle domains, e.g. diet, food waste, fashion, and altruistic actions like giving time and money, and how they can be deployed in behaviourally smart informational campaigns, nudges, and incentives to create sustainable habits. So a perfect combination of speakers here to look at us and to talk about plate waste prevention insights. Over to you then, Marc and Ganga.
Thanks a lot, Richard. What the agenda is going to be today for this presentation is I'm just going to give a quick introduction on Winnow. I'm then going to hand it over to Ganga to talk about the work that we've done with them in Macau and the very interesting study and the insights that came out with that. And then we'll circle back and we will close with a little bit more on our plate waste solution and kind of what the offering is there. So just a quick introduction for those of you that are not aware of Winnow, but also maybe those that are aware of Winnow and kind of how our solution has evolved. We really at Winnow are now really proud to be able to offer what we call a solution for every kitchen. So our technology is there to help kitchens measure and prevent food waste. We started off looking solely at waste that actually was in the direct control of the kitchen and typically with larger kitchens. We have a suite of products now that helps kitchens of all sizes. There's a technology called Track, which is basically a tablet-based technology for the smallest kitchens. It's a entry onto a tablet, digitizing that data and helping you to track it across a large volume of locations. We then have our sort of mid-size system, which is Control, which uses a camera to take photos of what's being thrown away as it's being wasted. And then we have our large kitchen solution, which is Transform, which then applies artificial intelligence to help to identify those items, increasing the accuracy of the data and the insights that come out of it. What we're going to talk about today is our new solution called Sense, which really is a touchless system to look at food that's coming back from plates. It's a part of the problem that is historically not addressed in the same way that food is in terms of when it comes from the kitchen. And we're going to talk more about it. But what I'll do for now is hand it over to Ganga to talk a little bit about the work that we've done with them as a lead up to helping to build out the product of Sense and what the insights are that come out of that.
Thank you so much, Marc. So actually jumping off from what Rory stopped at, there are two ways broadly we can think about changing food waste behavior, right? One is by tapping into unconscious processes. So things like changing plate size or portion size is a really good example. Another way to do this is actually, if you're interested in actually increasing awareness and public appetite, you might also want to give informational feedback about how much people are wasting and the implications of that, say for the environment, say in terms of resources, etc. And I think the collaboration between Winnow and LSC was really great because it sort of combined elements of both. So we combined both the sort of awareness creation as well as use some nudging techniques. So we did a 5-month study collaboration between Winnow, LSC, and Melco, which is a large casino chain in Macau. And what we did was run a trial for something like from December to May, so something like 12 weeks, where we looked at basically installing Winnow Sense system in the staff canteens and giving people feedback. But we also gave different types of feedback to different staff canteens. So in one, for instance, we just gave pure information on how much food people were wasting. In another one, we gave information on the environmental implications of that food wasted. And in the third, we sort of tweaked it and had this sort of anthropomorphic twist, because we know from past research that people pay more attention to human features, to faces, to emotions. So we figured out that maybe if you look at food with faces, people are much more interested in the feedback and are more attentive to it as well. So this was broadly how we did it. So we worked with Melco to install the system in staff cafeterias. And when we staggered the type of feedback we gave for every fortnight, essentially. And then what we did was track daily changes in actual observed food behavior over time within the staff canteen to actually plot what the differences were. At the end of the trial period, we also wanted to check two things: why people saved food, so what were their motivations, which is really interesting theoretically, as well as to inform future interventions. So for instance, do people care about the environment, or do they care more about saving money or values about saving food in general? And then we also sort of wanted to know what are the implications for food waste behaviors, not just at work, but also at home. So are there these unintentional spillover effects? Because you're more aware of food being wasted at work, do you also take food saving actions at home? Ideally, the holy grail is really that we want to scale these interventions. So benefits at intervention at work should also influence behaviors at home. So this is sort of the aim of the study more broadly, and kind of why we use this approach. It was fantastic to have this sort of collaboration with Winnow. And really go outside the lab, as we call it, or the academy in terms of university, because Winnow has this amazing tool which allows us to measure food waste. And importantly, there was also a willingness to partner with us and think about testing theoretically rigorous solutions, and also listening to the feedback. And we can get to that in a second. So this is sort of an example of the sort of informational feedback interventions that we designed. So the first one, for instance, is sort of like a control poster where we just gave people information about how much food was saved in each site, how that food waste changed over time. And we sort of included this motivational message, things like, great job, keep it up. The reason that can be quite important is because this is not an issue which really inspires happiness, right? Like people might feel guilty, and we want to offset any negative emotions like that. The second type of feedback we gave, for instance, in the other sites were things like the environmental footprint. And the third, we also sort of did food with faces, right? So this anthropomorphic cues, which, because we know that people are more attentive to this. What we found was that actually the anthropomorphic, that's the headline result really, the anthropomorphic texts were the most effective. So keep in mind that the type of information we presented didn't change. What was changing was actually the way we presented that information. So all this graph typically shows, and I'd like you to focus on the top two lines, the top and the bottom line, is essentially a change in food waste recorded by the Winnow Sense system over time. So this is actual observed data. This is not self-reported data, right? This is real food waste data. And what we found was over time, there was a faster reduction in food wasted in the site that received the anthropomorphic cues compared to the control site, which just received the food waste information, right? So the blue line at the bottom declines at a faster rate. That's the main real takeaway. The interesting question was, what about the top line? And I can come to that because we actually see a bit of an increase. So the big takeaway was we found nearly a 35% reduction in food waste in the site, which had the anthropomorphic, posters. And that makes sense theoretically for us because we know that actually people pay more attention to human features, and incorporating feedback of that kind can be much more powerful than just giving them statistical information. When we actually looked at the survey data, we found that the most significant motivations for reducing food waste at work was that they saw the company having the values to actually reduce food waste. So this alignment between a company's values and their actions was really important. The second motivation which drove people to actually change their behavior was actually the need to reduce food waste resources. Interestingly, in this particular context, global warming concern wasn't much of a driver, right? And we find that that might be because of the place where we studied it. The third thing we also found was people who reported reducing and making efforts to reduce food waste at work was also correlated with efforts to reduce food waste at home. So there was this positive spillover effect where people actually took food saving efforts at home as well, which we were really delighted to find. So I think the study was a really interesting exercise because it took quite theoretically rigorous insights from academic research and really took it into the field. And we could actually monitor real behavior real time. And not only that, we also had these unexpected positive spillover effects to other domains where people can waste food, because it's a very complicated thing, right? You can waste food at work, you can waste food at home, you can waste food when you go out to restaurants. So in this case, we really want to figure out interventions which can help mobilize actions across a variety of these contexts. And information feedback framed in the right way can be a promising tool, the initial research suggests. I'd be most happy to share the paper. It's still a preprint, so it needs to be reviewed, but I'd be delighted to have more people read it and also give me feedback on it. And a big thank you to Winnow for actually collaborating with us to look at this work. And back to you, Marc.
Thanks, Ganga. And just to say that it's been really a pleasure working with LSE on this, and there's some exciting stuff that we're exploring further. Obviously, nothing sort of in the firm plans yet, but we want to continue the research on this and continue to kind of push forward the thinking, because I think we're really just scratching the surface on the insights that we have here. we then are just going to talk about is a little bit about Winnow Sense. So Winnow Sense, will sort of go through a video and kind of how the technology works. And Winnow Sense is built with the first premise of recognizing that when you're trying to actually record what's coming back from plates, that there's a couple of things that you need to get right. One is basically, it's a very busy time having staff actually clear food from plates. You can't really have any additional steps. And so the way the technology works simply is you throw food in the bin and the recording happens automatically. So there's sort of no touch within that. The second is to then think about how we gather data around that. And we capture a combination of weight data and photo data of what was actually coming back from plates that then feeds into information around how you can do better menu engineering. That sort of data around what's being thrown away is used and fed into signage. And we can actually get into the detail of actually what's being thrown away, which helps to drive insights around how one might change portioning or recipes to be able to make that happen. It then talks just about some of the tools that we have that come out of it. So it's touchless. It focuses on food cost reduction. It sort of gathers insights. Basically, my view is if you don't have a clean plate, there's some insight there around what the preference was, either on how much you gave or the actual food quality itself, and helps you sort of make a better environmental impact. There are two tools that we use in addition to the recording to help clients that are using Sense actually make reductions. The first one is what we call a plate waste audit. Now, today we use our artificial intelligence to be able to recognize what's coming back in all sorts of forms in the kitchen, and that process creates automation and makes it very easy to record that. Well, we have ambitions to in real time use our AI on plate waste. We're just not there yet. And so what we're offering at the moment with Sense is an annual plate waste audit. And in the first year, there's actually a couple of audits that happen. And what that means is we look at actually what's coming back from plates at an agreed period of time. And we will look at the photos of what's coming back from plates, and we will begin to decompose what actually is it that's being thrown away. One interesting insight from Melco was that in one kitchen, they had a much higher level of actual meats that were coming back from the plate, where in another one, it was bones that were coming back from the plate. And I guess the way I look at this is we really want to be focusing on avoidable waste. And so when we're looking at bones coming back, frankly, that's just part and parcel of how the food is served. And while we want to recycle that, it's still something that is not necessarily of a concern from a portion control side. However, on the other side, from the meat perspective, we dug into that. We dug in and we found that there were preferences around the meat being served, that there were portion issues on the meat being served. And frankly, it was a pretty quick win to be able to change the way that product was served, to be able to make changes there. So those visual insights of understanding what is it that's regularly coming back. And I talk to chefs and they say quite often, well, I kind of look at what plates are coming back, so I have a sense of this. And undoubtedly many people do. But when you look at this data over a very long horizon, when you look at it over a week, for example, and you start to see the patterns and you start to see how it differs, you begin to actually identify patterns that you wouldn't through sort of normal monitoring, where I think a lot of the power sits. The second is a communication toolkit that is informed by the work that we've done with LSE. It's a communication journey around communicating this to those that are wanting to sort of share what they're doing. We recognize that actually having public communication about plate waste reduction may not fit every brand in terms of how it works. So it's an optional thing to do with this, but in staff restaurants and where it aligns with the brand to actually get serious about reducing plate waste, it's a pretty powerful tool and leverages those insights about the anthropomorphizing of food to be able to help to drive that. That sense, zooming back out to Winnow today, and really excited about this sort of coming out of the pandemic. We are stronger than ever. We're now in over 1,400 kitchens, live in 45 countries. The main thing that we focus on as a business, our key metric, is how much food waste we're preventing. Today, we're saving our clients around 61,000 tons of CO2 each year. from being wasted. That's the environmental metric. In terms of meals, it's over 35 million meals a year. In terms of cost savings, it's over $40 million a year. And the business case is there. We typically save our clients anywhere between 2 to 10 times Winnow fees, with a broad set of clients using our technology to help them in various ways. And so, yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for the time. I just want to close by saying that it's been, again, a pleasure working with LSE on this. I think there's a lot more research to be done. Sense is really our first foray into looking at plate waste. We love to have conversation with people about it. We're continuing to evolve how we do this, but we're excited now to be looking at the complete issue of waste in kitchens and coming up with best-in-class solutions that are there to be able to help those that want to address it do so in an impactful and a sustainable way. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Marc and Ganga, for an excellent session. There's some really fascinating insights that came out of that work, which I'm sure might lead to you posing some questions in the Q&A. So if I can ask you, please, by all means, put some questions in the Q&A. And thank you, Ganga, for giving us the link to the preprint as well of your research, so people can have a look at that hot off the press, so to speak. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Eleanor Morris, Special Advisor for Food and Drink at WRAP, to talk about approaches to place waste reduction from the award-winning Guardians of Grub campaign. Over to you, Eleanor.
Today, I'll be sharing with you insights from WRAP research, as well as practical tools so that you can take action right now on plate waste. This is going to help you improve profitability and reduce your carbon impact. In the UK, the hospitality and food service sector throw away over 1 million tonnes of food every single year. And the staggering fact is that 75% of the food that ends up in the bin could have been eaten. So that's why we have WRAP's Guardians of Grub campaign, which is all about helping the hospitality sector take action on exactly this. So from preventing edible food from ending up being thrown away. And what do consumers think about food waste? Well, in the UK, the Food Standards Agency conducts regular trackers to gather insights. And more recently, they're starting to show that food waste is really gaining interest with the consumers. And it's now second after food safety. People care about food waste, which means your customers care about food waste and what you're doing about that. Some WRAP research showed the following insights. So what do customers actually think when they eat out? So people who leave food don't feel any sense of ownership or responsibility about the food that they're leaving. The amount of food that they get is considered to be beyond their control. So many people won't ask for anything different. And the main reason that people leave food is that they think portion sizes are too big. So 41% find that portion sizes are too big. So we're going to highlight that. We've also got lots of research available on exactly this in much more detail. And we've also got insights as to what type of food people leave as well. So for example, 32% of people that left food left chips or fries. But for now, we're going to focus in on that portion size issue. And what do customers want to experience when they eat out? Well, they want to feel comfortable when they're ordering those different portion sizes. They would like the operators to use messages so that they can understand options, but with a really careful language. So they'd like to see menus for food choice options and portion sizes, and then cues and prompts through table cards, posters, and so on. And that's the route that you could publicise action that you're taking on reducing wasted food and how people can help do that as well. And when we asked consumers what were their preferred options to reduce plate waste, they highlighted that smaller portions for a lower price was most popular at 83%, followed by options around different types of meal choice. But perhaps most interestingly, 42% were happy to have a smaller option, even if it wasn't cheaper. So there's a real desire to not want to throw good food away from the consumer. And what is really key about understanding plate waste is actually visualizing it, seeing where it's coming from, what's being included, so that you can start to target and take action to reduce that. So we're here at Guardians of Grub to help you get cracking with tracking. And the simplest way to do this is to divide food waste into different categories so that you can work out which teams can help pinpoint those hotspots. So if you separate your food waste into spoilage, preparation, plate, and other, which might include buffet or overproduction, then you can understand, using our tools and tracking sheets, you can start to see where those hotspots are and then work with the teams to quantify and see over an audit period, say 4 weeks is what our tool is set up for. You can see those savings, whether they're financial, carbon, or the weight reduction that you're seeing over those 4 weeks in those different areas. So everything you need is available freely on our calculator tool. And we know that it works. We have lots of case studies on our Guardians of Grub website. One company, Robinson's Brewery, have been using the Guardians of Grub tools and sharing case studies, which is fantastic. What they saw was when they started to look at measuring and separating their food waste, they recognised that plate waste was a real issue. So they reduced that by 67% simply through offering smaller portion sizes, particularly chips and sauces, removing some garnishes. So for example, rather than automatically including coleslaw, offering it as an addition. And these savings and others, so on the preparation and spoilage side, led to £6,000 worth of savings. And as you can see, the comment from Dave from the ship was that customers and staff really benefited from this, and that actually it didn't take that long to do after all. It makes a difference to the bottom line as well as the environment. And we've got all the tools you need. You can access those on our website. We've got a course that's 15 minutes and guides you through accessing those tools. So it's really easy to find out the ways that you can target, measure and act on food waste. And right now we've got a fantastic course called Becoming a Champion. Here's a quote from Eleanor, who have been through it. There's a video on our website as well. You can see the link at the bottom of the page. But businesses that have taken part have seen immediate changes. So you can see here reductions in just 4 and 5 weeks on the amount of weight per cover, which are really staggering. So please register by mid-March to get access to this course. It's available freely for companies in the UK, and we'd love to have you as part of that. You get access to certificates, podcasts, templates, case studies, everything you need to develop your skills and those of your team. So you've heard about the tools to take action. Let's revisit some more recent research that WRAP undertook in 2020. You will see on this slide that there are opportunities to improve information shared with customers. So for example, here about sides and garnishes, we've got some opportunities in the rarely and never area of the graph. We can start to improve those. Very rarely and never do you get offered a doggy box or container to take your leftovers home. So that's something that could be worked on. But where we've been talking about portion sizes particularly, there's a real opportunity here. So the menu needs to describe what portions are available. And we can see that staff, front of house, need to help give guidance on portion sizes. So there's absolutely loads of opportunity to tackle portion sizes, talk about it with your customers, and it's a real win-win to reduce plate waste. And when we asked consumers about whether they saw improvements in what food venues are doing about food waste, they said yes, they think they're doing a lot. But they could do some more. You can see here at 26%. Then 40% thought, no, not really, there could be a lot more. And 24 didn't have an opinion. But you can see here, there's a real opportunity to push this and talk about the work that you're doing, share your plans with staff and customers, and really make a difference to your impact on profit and climate change. And why not get involved with our second ever Food Waste Action Week here in the UK? You could complete the 15-minute cost saving skills course to kickstart your food waste reduction journey, or you could sign up to the Becoming a Champion online learning before the week, so that during the week you're walking the walk and really showing your customers that you're committed to tackling wasted food by offering maybe portion size options or refills. You can also highlight how customers and staff can take action at home by making links to our website, lovefoodhatewaste.com. So in summary, there's never been a better time to focus on plate waste. Consumers want to take action. You have all the tools available for free and a week to raise awareness. So together we can all work to feed people, not bins. Thank you for your time.
And it's great to hear some more examples of people actually doing this within businesses and making it work not only environmentally, but also financially. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Julianne Caluette-Noble to introduce the industry panel session. Julianne joined the Sustainable Restaurants Association in 2016 after 5 years of running Jamie Oliver's programs for improving school food and food education across the UK. The SRA is a not-for-profit membership organisation committed to accelerating the change towards an environmentally restorative and socially progressive hospitality sector in the UK. Over to you, Julianne. Lots to talk about, I think, from those presentations.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Richard, for the introduction. And it's really a pleasure to be with all of you guys today, speaking about an issue that's incredibly important and often overlooked when talking about food waste reduction in hospitality. I am really honored to be joined by such a wonderful panel from industry itself to share their experiences in the practicalities of running a kitchen and how their businesses are tackling these issues. So I'm thrilled to be joined by Emily Hassett from the Restaurant Group, Hamish Cook from ISS, and Paul Hawkins from Unilever Food Solutions. And we're going to kick off with a simple introduction question. I'm interested to know where each of your interests in plate waste comes from and the challenges that or the opportunities that you see this presenting your brand. So Emily, perhaps you could start.
Yeah, of course. So we originally started looking at our food waste in general. So we created an audit with the SRA looking at the three sections of food waste and found that plate waste was our hardest hitter. It's about 3/4 of our food waste overall in our kitchens. So we knew we needed to tackle that first. We'd already done training in regards to prep and spoilage anyway, so we knew we had that relatively covered. So we knew plate waste was the one to tackle. So we have started looking at that across all of our brands and have created audits looking at that a bit deeper. So we did a 2-week audit in a few of our kitchens where we looked at what was being thrown away on the plate and created questionnaires for our teams to jot down what those ingredients were. And then we took that information away to see what ingredients we need to look at on our menus to see where any changes need to be made to improve that plate waste number.
Brilliant, thank you. Hamish, do you want to tell us a little bit about what sparked your interest in plate waste and what challenges or opportunities this has presented you at ISS?
Thanks, Julianne. Obviously, as a large global food service provider in a range of different environments and countries, our interest is probably twofold, a bit like the topic of today's session. Firstly, it's around our social, environmental and social responsibilities with regards to sustainability. We want to be leaders in this space, and we believe that our stakeholders from our internal teams as well as our customers should be focused on reducing waste, regardless of whether it's plate waste or food waste, but other consumable items as well. And we want to make sure that our behaviours in our sites where we provide food mirrors that responsibility, and we provide tools and information to customers so that they can make educated decisions. Secondly, obviously, there's the commercial or cost impact of food waste. And I think as a large organisation that operates over such a diverse footprint, costs can very easily get out of hand. And we need to make sure that we give our frontline teams the tools to measure what is happening with regards to waste in a clear and transparent manner. And that's why we utilise systems like Winnow and others to make sure that we can provide them with the tools to make easy decisions about generating plate waste.
Brilliant, thank you. How about Paul from Unilever Food Solutions?
Hi, well, Unilever have got responsibility as a big manufacturer to be sustainable, and we really believe that we are one of the leaders in the manufacturing world. So as part of the bigger you in food solutions, we really want to help our customers, and that's why we developed a free tool that's on our website, which is called Wise Up on Waste, which help businesses track waste, not only plate waste, but we've broken it down into different segments to give preparation waste, production, spoilage, and plate waste. So we're there to help people be more sustainable. And as chefs, as part of the Food Solutions team, we're there to help and give advice to our customers that we serve and use our products.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to jump back in. Emily, you articulated really brilliantly how, as a large brand, you guys started the process by looking at your your waste holistically, and then realized how much plate waste was a part of that, and that was something that you guys needed to tackle. When you set out to tackle this within the brand, did you overcome any resistance internally? How did marketing, comms, sales, etc. feel about tackling this issue as a brand?
It's a very good question. You obviously have to include so many of the divisions when you are tackling plate waste, because it does involve so many of the divisions within the business. We obviously had to take it to the likes of marketing, to ops, to the executive chefs to sign off as well. And there is challenges, obviously, because it might be, for example, one of the things we're looking at currently is reducing the portion size of fries. I know that's been talked about quite a bit today. It is one of the ones we're looking at. And of course, with that, we're still charging the same price, or might be, when we're looking at that, we don't know whether we need to reduce the price. It's trying to balance that customer expectation. We have brands that we have loyal customers that come to us. They know what to expect every time they come in, and if that changes, there could be a bit of backlash. So it's challenging, but you have to look at working on it in a small basis at the beginning. So for us, we've only trialed it in a few sites, and we're going to monitor the customer responses and see how it goes, and then see to actually hopefully then extend it if it is successful, which we hope that it will be.
Absolutely. I think it's really important, right, that you have all those stakeholders aligned as you get started and figure out what works as you go and as you trial. So I think that's really important that you shared. Hamish, when you guys are tackling, you've talked about being a large multinational brand. How are you actually managing this operationally? And are you measuring your progress as you go? Have you seen whether or not that's affecting your relationship with clients and your sales in different locations?
Yeah, really interesting sort of topic, Julianne. As I previously outlined, tackling food waste is just part of how we do business. We want to make sure that we're lean and efficient and maximising, the performance of our operations. But one of the key initiatives that we've looked at over the last couple of years in particular, and probably more European-centric, but it's really been about redesigning the service environments that we operate in, and that's obviously in partnership with our clients. So it's moving away from what many people would understand is a fairly traditional way of having lunch in Europe, which is a buffet where people come down and enjoy, taking a range of food items off the buffet, and driven by a need to reduce waste, but also, some of the implications of the pandemic. We've moved these types of services to more of a curated plated meal service that's allowed us to fundamentally change how customers interact with us from a meal perspective, but also how our staff interact with our customers from a meal perspective. So we're having a direct dialogue with customers over the counter as we're handing them a plate, rather than just letting the customer take food off a buffet, which is in many instances unsupervised. So that's obviously involved us having to redesign the service from a physical perspective, but also work with our customers and clients to make sure that we educate people about the behaviour changes of a new service. And that is a great opportunity for us to interact with customers, and tell them why we're doing this, which has that double-barreled impact of, we're doing it to help reduce waste, which is on everybody's agenda. We can report that back from a measurement perspective, what's happened to our waste over time. And we're seeing sort of where we've done this successfully in some of our locations, waste reduction levels, between 10 and 20%, which is really substantial when you think about it and translate that across a multi-country sort of operation. And I think we would say that our clients have really embraced this as well, because we've gone through a process of interaction with them, and customers likewise. So, we would say there hasn't been too many negatives with regards to, impact on sales, albeit that there is certainly a customer expectation level to manage. Yeah.
Brilliant. That's really, really great to hear, and always inspiring to hear when there's no impact on negative impact on sales as you go. Paul, you've talked about Guardians of Grub and the Wise Up on Waste tool that Unilever does. And what are the barriers that your customers are expressing to you after having used that tool, getting those insights? What are those conversations that you're having on the ground with chefs about the barriers to tackling some of these issues?
This tool's been up on our website. It's a free tool and it's been up there for a good few years now. But obviously, the first thing that is a barrier for a customer or a chef really is time and staffing as well. You know, the first thought about when they look at the tool and go, okay, I've got to do X, Y, Z, and that's going to take me time, or need someone to do that, is the first kind of barrier to say, okay, I've got a business to run, I'm short-staffed, or I haven't got any staff to do this. But really, you know, we say, you know, try and look for that hero within the business that can take this on and have ownership to it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a chef, and especially when we're talking about plate waste as well. You know, it could be the kitchen porter, perhaps, or someone from front of house, where actually they are taking ownership of that. Because, you know, the key to this is to track and to see the results after that. So if you've got someone, or, you know, if the business, we suggest, you know, brief the business and get someone really on board to say, actually, you're going to be our hero for this. And then when they put the data into the app, they see those results coming back. You know, there is that real sense of ownership and almost a sense of pride to go, actually, look, this is how much we've wasted, and this is how much, if we do a few tweaks, how much we can save. And the tool will give you those kind of tips as well. So, you know, when we do come up against those resistance or those barriers, we just say, you know, try and find a hero in your business that really wants to champion this.
Brilliant. And I think that's Guardians of Grub obviously does a lot of that as well, that tool that Eleanor was mentioning earlier. And Emily, that has been fundamental in your process, I know, from the audits that you've done across sites, finding those champions internally. Emily, what are the decisions that you guys have made in terms of tackling your plate waste? I know you're only starting to pilot in various locations now, but what are you planning to do, and how are you expecting, or have you seen any customer response just yet?
Yeah, so we, as you say, we're starting to trial it. We did begin with one of our pubs brands in November, starting the second part of the audit, which is measuring plate waste. It's really interesting, actually. We had a bit of a surprise from what we had. So the pubs that we're trialing it in currently are based in the south. We're looking at removing the skin off of the cod in the fish and chip dish that we serve. Typically, you would see that the south part of the country would typically prefer to have the skin on for fish and chips, and in the northern part of the country, it would typically be skin off. So we did get a bit of pushback actually from our chefs, understandably, because they would thought that they would expect that the customers that always come in for fish and chips, normally older clientele, would prefer to have the skin on. But we did see that that was what was being quite often thrown away. So you'd have the bottom piece of the batter and the skin that were commonly being thrown away on the plate. What we've made sure to do during these audits is constantly monitor customer reviews and ensure that we're having that conversation with front of house staff and the customers, just to get the understanding of what they enjoyed of the dish. And there's not been any negative backlash on the skin being removed, as even though we expected there might be. And if it was that case, we would have had that conversation we're currently monitoring our food waste, and we're trying this part of it to see if that will help us. So I think it's always important to engage with the guests and educate them on what we're doing. I think being as open as possible with them is definitely positive and is necessary, because it goes a long way. And I think having that open conversation makes the world of difference.
And I think that ties back earlier to some of that video that was postponed, where the conversation around how do we, there's sort of we think we know what the customer wants, and so we're avoiding having some conversations. And yet if we introduce these ideas, if we introduce behaviors around asking if people want doggy bags, if we introduce behaviors around suggesting that there are different portion sizes, the customer might respond differently to what your expectation was. I know of a pub brand recently that has number one seller is a full English breakfast, and they've removed the tomatoes from the full English breakfast, expecting that there might be some pushback because Obviously, that's an important, iconic part of the dish. And yet what they've done instead is tomatoes available on request, because tomatoes were the #1 item that was being left on the plate. And you've seen a huge implication of that. People that want them can still get them. But there was no backlash to the idea that you had to take it off, and the savings are amazing. So that's really interesting to hear, Emily. Thank you.
Well, just to jump in, actually, you just reminded me of the takeaway boxes. We have takeaway boxes in our business and always have. But we always thought that it would be that the guests would be offered the takeaway box to take away anything that they had, and realised actually whilst doing these audits that wasn't the case. So it was another, again, just a training piece on front of house staff, just saying at the end of every meal, reviewing what the guests had left and just asking them if they want it. And we have seen an uptake in it, which is great.
Brilliant. Thank you. Hamish, you obviously deal with a whole bunch of different sector types in your business. Was wondering if you had seen any sort of trends across that, and if there were any commonalities in terms of quick wins on plate waste reduction that spanned across different platforms.
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting just listening to Ganga and Eleanor earlier about some of the research that's been done in this area, and mirrors some of the things that we would be talking about in this sort of space. I think because we primarily provide services to people in sort of workplace environments or education environments or even healthcare environments, they're there for something outside of their sort of main meal type events in the day. It's sort of lunch or breakfast or mid snack type services. So as I said earlier, a lot of it is about clear communication, but in our sort of space, it's actually about really understanding the type of customer we have in each environment. There isn't one sort of ruler that we can look at across our whole business and say, somebody who's working in an office is going to behave like this. In every office, there's different customer archetypes, as we would describe them as, who have different behaviours, different needs, different wants for what they get out of their food service on a daily basis, and how that adds to their whole workplace experience. So some of the things that I think we would say is really important is sort of engaging with those customers, so clear communication about what's happening with regards to food waste, so signage and things like that. And I was super interested with the research that Ganga did about how that can impact the food waste. So we'll be following up on that post this session. So that's great. I think it's flowing into, from our perspective, great menu planning, making sure that we've got the right type of food for the customer. If they've on a health agenda, making sure we've got a good range of healthy food and things like that. That would flow into portion control. And then from our perspective, one of the key things that we need to think about is the type of service flatware, so crockery, cutlery and things like that we utilise. If we're trying to sort of control portion sizes and putting what appears to be a small amount of food on a really big plate, we all of a sudden have a different sort of expectation between the customer and ourselves. If we have the right sized portion and the right size service equipment, whether it's a takeaway container or whether it's a piece of crockery, we all of a sudden get a better outcome when it comes to waste from that perspective. I think things like asking our customers to actually clear their own plates at the end of lunch sort of has a subliminal sort of benefit, because they actually see what's happening to waste, and that's a great sort of touch point for us to be able to sort of identify how much waste and what the waste trends are. So there's things like that we would do regularly. And I think using technology, as I said, like Winnow, to make sure that we can measure and have hard facts to support that messaging and communication is really important, not just from a customer perspective, but from our team's perspective, so they can change their behaviours.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You've got multiple people that you need to influence in this process, because you have to influence all of your staff, your front of house, back of house. And I really like what you said about engaging the customer in that experience of busting their, in a workplace environment, busting their own table and actually doing that, scraping off and experiencing that plate waste. Paul, a similar question to you. I guess you work with all sorts of different formats and businesses, and wondering if you had, any sort of observations on commonalities that spanned your different client types, or if there were any specific client themes that you would see rise from the work that you do?
It was really interesting. So we had a couple of sort of case studies for independent pubs actually, and the chef at the time said actually he never really looked at plate waste. So he was really hot on production waste, but he never really actually looked at that. So when he tried the app, and he said, "Oh, actually, I'll have to have a look at the plate waste." And what he noticed is it was something simple like the garnish they put on his plate, and by switching out, that was always the main thing that was left on his plate. But switching a lettuce to a different lettuce, he saved himself not only the wastage, but a significant amount of money on there. And it was a real eye opener for him in the pub because he was the pub owner as well. So obviously the financial side for him was really interesting. We work right across all the different sectors of the industry as well, and I think the key message we would say is a bit like Hamish said. Try to look at once you've identified the main culprits, so to speak, of plate waste, then have a look at the menu. And again on our website we've got a menu engineering tool where actually it looks at the dishes where there could be a lot of plate waste, and then you can tweak those. Especially as chefs. You should be looking at those anyway to see, okay, which dishes are performing well, which ones are making profit, which are lost anyway. So, if you're losing money from a plate waste point of view, as a chef, really should be looking at that. And that's, how we can support not only the wastage app, as well as a engineering on our website as well.
Brilliant, thanks. I think one of the things that we have heard definitely over and over again as the SRA over the last number of years has been that plate waste kind of drops down on the priority list because margin is already made, the costs are already sort of built in. And so it doesn't feel like there's those immediate cost savings because you're selling the dish and you're making money from it. And I think there's been a step change in terms of people's awareness because of the environmental impact or the ways that they're trying to account differently beyond just profit margin. And so it's really interesting to hear how you guys are all thinking of that. Before we jump into a few more questions, what would be your top recommendation to businesses who are concerned that tackling plate waste would mean disrupting the apple cart and reducing their sales?
I think it's doing it piece by piece. For us at the beginning, it seemed like this massive thing that we had to try and overcome. And we started it at a very small point. So we're only doing it in a handful of our restaurants at the start, just to see how we do, if any changes need to be made before we roll it out, because it could be that we might get something wrong, but that's okay because we're only doing it in a small amount at this point. And then it can be rolled out nationwide across our brands. And allowing us to have it in that small point just makes it a bit more easier to digest and understand where we need to make any changes and work from there. I think another point is also, as you said previously, having to include so many different divisions within the business. They do need to be included. It can't just be exec chefs saying that they want to do this. It has to be involving so many different people because it's such it does affect the whole business. But I think also communication with customers, especially with customers that always come to the restaurants, loyal customers. I think they need having that open conversation with them, letting them know if they question if there's, why is my portion of fries smaller than I normally would have had or how I had it last week. Having that open dialogue with them, I think it goes a long way and is really appreciated.
Right. And I would assume that sounds like your front of house knowing how to have those conversations in order to do that.
Absolutely. It's just a training piece. As well as back of house, having, for example, the separation of the different food waste streams at that point is what we had in the audit. It was also the front of house team also needed that training on having that open dialogue on what we're doing as part of the audit. And also for the takeaway bags, just increasing that communication with the guests.
Hamish, what about you? What about any top tip for those that are concerned that this means sales?
Yeah, I don't think we would see that, being aligned on reducing food plate waste means reducing sales. That's something that I don't think we recognise, but in our business, but it comes back to the importance of aligning our customers' expectations with our menu planning, and then measuring what is actually happening. And there's nothing like, measuring something to get a good positive outcome, and really making decisions and having a view about, is plate waste being driven by food quality? Is it being driven by portion size? Is it being driven by a misalignment between the customer's expectation about what they want for lunch versus what we're actually providing them for lunch or breakfast or dinner in their particular environment? So I think it comes back to communication, measurement, and having the right tools, and then nothing like just good business discipline with regards to observation and behaviour change.
You mentioned there that misalignment between customers' expectations of what they wanted for lunch versus what they got. And we were recently in a room with brands who were talking about just that, in terms of sharing all of the components of the dish in the menu description, because that often that misalignment between what that expectation was of what was coming with the dish versus what actually came. And then also some really, basic things like coriander being served on the side of a curry, and not just adding coriander to a dish, even though from some chef perspective that felt like sacrilege. If it's not mentioned on the menu, there might be people that have ordered it that didn't expect it to come, and it's ruined the whole dish for them. And so it's those expectations and aligning those two things, I think, is really, really important. It would be really great to hear, I guess, from each of you around whether or not Food Waste Action Week and these kind of levers across the industry are a good opportunity to have these conversations, or if you raise awareness in a different way across your brand.
Yeah, for us, it's especially from the point of view with, as I said before, increasing the communication with front of house and back of house staff. They're the most important guys in all of this. They're the ones on the front line doing the hard work for everyone ultimately. And I think having that Food Waste Action Week, for us, we're going to include it in comms, and it's, for us especially, it works quite well because our audits for other divisions within our company will be starting at that time. So it's that nice little link between it all for us. It kind of helps with that communication.
Brilliant. Let's see, I'm looking at the questions coming in from the audience in the chat. So I think Eleanor reminding everybody, these insights coming from across the sector, please be sure to share them in using #GuardiansGrub. Those always get shared out then to those that are using the tool. Someone was curious about the difference in plate waste generated in a buffet formula versus clients being served. Now, Hamish, you guys obviously have experience of these differing formats, and I wondered what those insights were.
Look, I think we would typically see buffets generate more plate waste, but they also generate more production waste, because once obviously food's been on a buffet, typically it's harder to reuse it. And you couldn't do that. I think we've got very good at offering, in many instances where we've transitioned from a buffet service to a plated service, to almost offer two sizes of plate or serving, and that's proved really quite beneficial. So people can sort of take a large or a small serving when we offer them a plate, and that's certainly reducing waste. And when you look at what's happening in those sort of environments, we would see that waste is almost minimal. We've got hundreds of people eating. A small receptacle for food waste is all we would need. And particularly now that people are separating waste from a recycle and food waste and perhaps general waste sort of perspective, I think we're seeing a reduction like that.
Great. Paul, excuse me, I'm so sorry, I forgot to ask you for your top tips. Could you jump in, please, with your top tips on how to change those expectations that managing your plate waste means a reduction in sales? That's quite
all right. I don't mind. I think the other two really have nailed it. Really, communication is key. I think internally and externally. I think engagement internally with your staff to get them on board, and then communicating actually that what you're doing as a business, isn't penny pinching, for instance. You're really trying to make a difference. And actually, if you can communicate the results of a trial, I think everybody would be on board with that. So yeah, that's kind of the key ones for me, really. And what you were saying about that, actually, as a brand, Hellmann's have done a campaign the last 2 years on create taste, not waste. And we're looking maybe to partner up regarding to Grub on that, in the coming year. So, as a company and as a brand, we are trying to be out there and providing something other than just products to our customers.
Brilliant. Yeah, that education piece is really valuable for you guys as a brand beyond just your products. There's a question here from Andrea Zick. Hi, Andrea, good to see you on the webinar. Emily, maybe directly to you. Is anybody or any of your brands thinking about doing anything specifically on managing bookings as a means to reducing food waste before it can even become waste? Obviously, this is a huge problem right now with the industry, with people not showing up for bookings. And
yeah, of course. For us, obviously, especially around the Christmas period, we saw a large decrease of cancellations in Christmas party bookings, for example. And I think at that point, obviously, we did have a lot of stock ready for the Christmas period. Luckily for us at that point, it wasn't yet in our kitchens. So it's just redistribution through charities and the like of that. But also for us, we did do it, especially during COVID, for product that was in our kitchens. It was just going to local food banks. So just finding any areas where we could donate that food, that's what we would always do instead.
Great. Let's see, any more of these questions? Events, Hamish, and I'm not sure how much events kind of falls into your purview, but within the event sector, do you have any other recommendations for best mechanisms or methodologies to reducing waste, specifically if you're in a temporary location or somewhere that you don't, that's pop up for a conference or a meeting?
We temporary sort of event catering isn't something that we do a lot of, but we do a lot of, fine dining or meeting, and we would call them events, but they're typically inside a client premises for working lunches and or, product launches or special meetings. I come back to this discipline about really understanding, the user base, understanding what type of event it is. Is it a lunch event where people are perhaps going to want to eat less because we know that as part of an all-day event, they're going to be sitting down and making sure that we, and not burning a lot of energy. And so therefore we need to be having lighter choices, smaller portions. So there's things like that come back to this discipline of food service or catering with regards to, right sizing and pre-planning to make sure you align what the requirements are. We would take that, through our whole business, and make sure that we do that. For some events, particularly, where numbers might be variable, we would try and get our customers to pre-order, what type of food they would like, and at least give a steer about, do they want the beef, the chicken, or the vegetarian option. So making sure we have clear direction on that, so we don't have to produce one of each just in case for every customer. So there's that. And it's a bit about, from our perspective, making sure we have the records of how our customers behave so that we can look back on that and say, well, this event last year, last week, last month, this is how that group of people sort of chose, and making sure that, we have a discipline around, looking back at that as well.
That, I think, is a really good point, because having that history to look back on, it's almost the same as running these regular audits within your kitchens and this data review to inform your decision making going forward. Brilliant. I think we're coming to the close of our session. It seems like there's a few questions that might have been answered in your final response there, asking whether the demographics of an event make a difference to the catering, and knowing that in advance. Sounds like you guys do that sort of insight work to know who your audience might be. I'm not sure if any of you, there's a comment about hotels dealing with many different cultures and expectations on portion size. I think that probably could be the same within restaurants and visitors. diners coming in. Do we feel that does anybody have a comment on how to communicate these messages to a more diverse clientele when coming through your restaurants or your spaces?
I think, I don't know if this will answer the question, but we done a pilot with a national hotel chain where they had 26 different nationalities working in this hotel, and we helped, just looking at the languages and writing signages or communicating in different languages helped get the message that we wanted to get across. So, that might be something to go actually, if you are suggesting it's a small and medium portion, it could be different languages. The expectation piece is you can always ask for more, and especially if you look at the menu to go, actually, you can look at the menu and go, right, make the sides a bit more interesting, or whatever the garnish is of that dish, it could be added as a side as well. So, I suppose it goes back as well to looking at the menus to go, can I engineer these into making the portions bigger or smaller by offering sides rather than the actual garnish?
Great, thank you. Well, I think you guys have offered some really tangible and practical advice. I really appreciate that. I'm going to hand back to Richard now. I can see that there's still a few more things floating around, so maybe our panelists can jump into the Q&A and the chat to answer some of the questions that we didn't manage to answer. Thank you so much, all.
And thank you, Julianne, as well, for leading that session. There were some fantastic insights. What I really liked was that combination of measurement and real practical examples to show that you can really do this and you can engage your customers positively with this whole agenda. And actually bring real benefits in terms of food waste savings, but also real benefits in cost savings as well. And it was just fantastic insight. So thank you very much indeed, Julianne. So I'd just like to, as we're coming to the end of the webinar, I'd just like to introduce our final poll, just to sort of get your sense of how things have, how your thoughts have generated as we've gone, have changed as a result of this webinar. So here are the questions up on your screen. I see reducing plate waste as a key priority for my business. I'll take action to measure our customer plate waste in order to reduce it. I will proactively communicate plate waste reduction as part of our sustainability credentials to customers and clients. And that was one of the things that was discussed quite significantly today. I can see the opportunities for communication action on wasting food with our clients, customers, and investors. I have concerns that reducing consumer food waste will be detrimental to my business, and I'll be taking part in Food Waste Action Week 2022. So please tick all the ones that apply to you. We've just got another minute or so just to sort of get your feedback on exactly those points. So tick all the ones that are relevant to you, and we'll just give you another few moments to answer the questions before we get the results. So just 6 questions there to answer, and look forward to seeing the outcome of those. Okay, I think that's fine. And actually, as Eleanor has pointed out, if you have any additional Q&As, please do put them into the box before the end of the webinar, and we'll make sure that we answer all of your questions if we didn't manage to get round to it during the actual panel session itself. So can we see the results of the poll question 2, please? That'd be great. Oh, that's excellent. Really good to see. Reducing food waste is a key priority for my business. I will take action to measure food waste. That's 3/4 of you, and I'll proactively communicate place waste. And I think that's a really interesting development. 79% of you saying that's something that you'll do as a result of this. And you see opportunities for communications as well, nearly 90% of you on that. Great to see that very few of you now got concerns that reducing food waste will actually be, consumer food waste will be in any way detrimental. And it's great to see that 3/4 of you will also be taking part in Food Waste Action Week in 2022, because that's what we need in order to get messages across collaboratively to as many customers as we possibly can. So thank you very much indeed. So it now just remains for me to move on to making some concluding remarks, which is next slide, please. So just in terms of the practicalities, we will send out an email shortly with all the links to the materials, and that includes Rory's video so that you can see it in its entirety. With the recordings of today will be hosted on Guardians of Grub. We'll also be answering all the questions that you've posed, just to make sure that all questions have been answered, and that will also be hosted on Guardians of Grub. And I'd just like to plug other webinars. There's the Serving Net Zero, which is already recorded on the Guardians of Grub website, so please have a look at that. And next week, there's a skills webinar on the 25th of January, how to improve skills right across the kitchen. And I'd encourage you to put that in your diary, because that'll also be another great session in terms of the insights you get. So it just remains for me to make one final point. Thank you very much indeed for joining. At the end of the webinar, just in a few moments, there will be a survey which would just ask you all to fill in before you leave. This will just help us in terms of improving our webinars going forward. And if I can leave you with one final point, is today's webinar has all been about tackling plate waste. And I hope you've got from this that tackling plate waste is good for business and good for the planet. And collaboration is key to taking action and driving change. Collaboration within your businesses, collaboration between businesses, and Guardians of Grub is here to help you and hold your hand in all the ways in order to get to deliver and reduce customer food waste, as well as reducing food waste right across the hospitality and food service section. Please get in touch with any of the organisations that have hosted today. That's Winnow, ourselves RAP, the Sustainable Restaurants Association, and Zero Waste Scotland, to help you implement. And can I just ask you one more time, if you wouldn't mind doing the survey at the end, that would be fabulous. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, and look forward to welcoming you again at the next Guardian of Grub webinar. Thank you.